Reload founder Stephen Gutowski reflects on his time at CNN. Plus, William Kirk from Washington Gun Law joins us to talk about the latest surrounding the SIG P320. All this and more on the news update.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the news update. I'm contributing writer Jake Fogleman, joined as always by Reload founder Stephen Gutowski. TheReload.com, of course, is where you can head on over today to sign up for our free weekly newsletter. It'll keep you up to date on all things happening in the world of gun politics and policy. To kick things off this week, I think you wanted to update our Reload listeners on a little bit of a personal note. As many longer time listeners probably know, you have been a contributor on CNN to talk about guns on the national network there. But there's been a little bit of an update on that front, right?
Yeah, kind of a personal and professional update. I am no longer a CNN contributor. My contract was up at the beginning of this month, and CNN decided not to renew this time around. I've been there 3 years and was part of the Guns in America team. And they didn't renew the two other members of the outside contributors on that team last year. So it was kind of a pretty clear sign that maybe I wasn't going to continue to get renewed either. And so, yeah, my time as an official paid contributor is done at CNN. I may still be on the channel from time to time. Whenever I'm still willing to go on there as a guest, occasionally when shows want me on. I had a pretty good experience, I would say, overall, working with those CNN colleagues. I enjoyed my time there, by and large, and happy with how it all came out. I'm disappointed that it's didn't get renewed. Of course, it's a substantial financial problem for me, but things are generally going all right. I was prepared for this. We have savings. The Reload does make enough money to where we're going to be able to keep going. But, certainly losing that contract doesn't help with any of that. Not that it was a major cut. It was never over six figures or anything like that. It was a very big part of helping me be able to do this work. If you're so inclined and want to continue supporting the reporting that we do here, it's always helpful to go and buy a membership. That is how we fund the Reload and the reporting that we do. But things will continue as normal on that front for the foreseeable future. And I'll look for other opportunities outside of CNN as well now too. I'll have the ability to go on other networks. And so if anybody wants to have me on their shows, feel free to reach out. I'm pretty open to doing interviews in all sorts of different venues. So, that's, but yeah, as an update, you saw the piece, and then I had an extra piece with some more insights from my time at CNN, for Reload members, as well. But yeah, I just, not only did I lose the CNN contract, but I've now also cut off all of my hair for those listening. People on YouTube can tell, but yes, that was actually for the wedding that's coming up in October. But my fiance wanted the shorter hair, but kind of a fresh start thing now with the CNN contract ending, and then a totally new look debut here on the podcast.
Yeah, and as you teased your members piece, I encourage Reload members to go check that out if they can, because I think it is valuable to look at what that experience was like with CNN's sort of experiment with doing some a different approach to gun reporting for at least for a time with all those various outside contributors. Yeah,
and I mean, I thought it was overall good. It was a good experience. No one ever tried to make me say anything I didn't want to say at CNN. That all the producers and staff there and hosts, reporters, valued my opinion. I think they still do. As far as I can tell, my contract was coming to an end when I was on just a week or so ago after the Manhattan shooting. And so I didn't have any any problems with like somebody trying to, because I'm sure that's what a lot of people, I've gotten a lot of questions on that over the years. Like, oh, are they, how is it to work at CNN? Or people have their preconceptions about what the outlet is like. And, I can just say in my experience that no one ever tried to force me to think a certain way or say certain things. And in fact, it was, they were very respectful of me and my expertise on this topic and wanted to learn more about it. That was my overriding experience, that they did come to me. Now, I didn't get input on every single thing that was every segment that involved guns on CNN. It wasn't like that, right? I was a contributor. I wasn't an editor, or I wasn't in position to dictate what CNN's coverage was going to be. But I did get to have input oftentimes, especially after mass shootings, especially early on when they announced this team, Guns in America team. Excuse me, we're both having some throat clearing issues, but yeah, they announced this team after they'd signed me. They didn't really consult, I don't think, any of us before they announced that it was going to be like a team effort, because initially I was brought on, I signed a couple months before the other people did, and then they I guess CNN's leadership, which by the way has changed since I started there, right? It's a different leadership at CNN now than there was when I first started, which also might play into why, that this kind of petered out the way that it did. But, they seemed to want like a more focused group, but it honestly never was that coherent in terms of like the Guns in America team doing anything in particular. Sometimes in the, after some sort of high profile story that involved guns, mostly mass shootings, they would, email us for our input. And, even if we weren't going on for a specific segment. So they did stuff like that to try and inform, the rest of CNN's reporting. But, and I think it did improve in that regard. I think one of the things I've criticized many media outlets for over the years is just a total lack of knowledge on firearms, both their form and function and the laws that govern them, and even oftentimes the politics that surround them. And so I think certainly CNN's reporting on that improved while I was there. I'm sure it wasn't perfect. I'm sure you could find examples of segments where people didn't say things the right way during those, the last 3 years. And, sometimes I saw those too and would, say something internally to try and, improve on mistakes. No outlet is ever going to be 100%. But I do think there was a level of improvement while I was there. And I was glad to be able to contribute to that. I did, I think, one thing I talk about in my piece on this is just this sort of disappointment of how much focus was on mass shootings, that there was not as much reporting on other topics that deal with guns in America while I was there. And that's been another long-term complaint that I've had, or critique that I've had of major media outlets. And it's in no ways exclusive to CNN, and I don't even think CNN is the worst. They're probably one of the better outlets when it comes to this in major media, because the general push in major media is that guns only come up as a topic of coverage around mass shootings, or in the aftermath of mass shootings, to talk about the fallout that they generated. So that was most of what I did at CNN. And that's what I kind of expected it to be going in, or was, thought that it could become that. And it was for the most part. Now I was able to pitch stories and get, some more stories beyond mass shootings made into segments and be on for a guest for those segments. So it wasn't only mass shootings, but it was dominated by mass shootings because that's what the media environment focuses on. And it's not fully, some conscious editorial decision. I don't think it's partially the environment, and mass shootings are kind of tailor-made stories for cable news, which focuses on, sensational breaking events that develop in an unpredictable but inevitable time frame, right? Like that's what cable news is there for, or that's like the kind of story that it really thrives on, and so that's what mass shootings are. And so, there's reasons beyond just producer thinks that this story is important, that mass shootings get so much coverage, and of course they are important stories that do deserve coverage, so it's not a problem. I just was still hoping to expand that coverage beyond mass shootings. There's so much more going on with guns in America, as you can see here from our coverage at the Reload, and we even just focus primarily on the political side of things. We do some cultural reporting as well, but there's so much more going on with guns in America than mass shootings or gun crime or gun politics that just don't get as much attention as I think they ought to. And so, I wish that I'd been able to accomplish more on that end during my time there. But, again, overall, I think it was a good experience. I'm proud of the work that I did with CNN, and happy with the way they treated me, and would gladly go back on there. But also happy to talk to all sorts of other outlets as well. I have more freedom to do that now. That's basically what the contract was. It was an exclusivity deal for TV. So I can now go on other outlets because that exclusivity is no longer there. And I do have, some other roles still too, like We the Free, the streaming service that's been doing some really high profile or high quality, high production value gun related shows. I'm a contributor over there. So Sir Michael Singleton, who's actually also a CNN contributor, he's still there, hosts a show over there that I go on from time to time. So still have that role. And then also the Dispatch, I'm contributing writer over there too. So still have other stuff going on, but the CNN contract ending means that I can do even more. And I'm happy to do interviews and give my expertise and share our reporting on most outlets that would have me. Maybe not every single one. Depends. I'm not going to go on some crazy thing, but I'm pretty open to just doing lots of other interviews as well. So anyway, that sums up, I think, what the change on the CNN front, and a little bit of insight into, what the experience was like. I talk a lot more about it in that members piece though. So people want to read that, they can head over and buy a membership today to help support the reporting we do here as well. That's how we fund this.
Yeah, members should definitely go check that out. But outside of the personal and the professional update, we actually have our final piece from our intern, Ben, from the summer, who did a very thorough report on the status of essentially young adult handgun purchases in the Fifth Circuit. If listeners will recall, sort of an interesting scenario that's transpired down there after the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals struck down the federal law that requires people to be 21 before they can purchase handguns from federally licensed firearm dealers. It sort of sat in a weird purgatory for a while as the DOJ weighed whether or not it was going to appeal it, and then it ultimately decided it was not going to appeal that decision, and so that remained the last judicial word on the matter. But it's been, about 6 weeks now since that's happened. Ben went and did a little bit of digging into whether or not young adults can purchase handguns down in those states now.
Yeah, it's been 6 weeks since DOJ decided not to appeal the decision. And it's been almost 8 months since the decision came down. And I think this is an interesting story because it explains something that is often overlooked. And I think most readers would not have an understanding of, which is, you get the big headline decision from an appeals court that says, in this case, the ban on dealers selling handguns to 18 to 20-year-olds is unconstitutional. And you think, all right, well, 18 to 20-year-olds can now go buy handguns at least in the circuit where that decision came down. And the reality is that's not always the case. In fact, usually it's what happened here, which is that we still don't have the final injunction from the lower court, because usually what courts will do is not the appeals court won't issue an injunction themselves. They'll issue a ruling, and then they'll tell the lower court to go and issue an injunction that is in line with what they held. And so that can take some time. In this case, it can take months and months for that to actually happen, for you to see a practical impact on the ground. And in the meantime, you're in this interesting legal situation for the people impacted, right? For the people affected here, especially the gun dealers that now, in theory, should be able to sell handguns to this age group, because technically, if they sold a gun, if a gun dealer sold a gun to an 18-year-old tomorrow, handgun, again, because this law, by the way, is only applies to handguns and pistols. It doesn't apply to long guns. 18 to 20-year-olds can buy those from gun dealers lawfully. They just can't buy handguns and pistols. And so, but if a dealer was to do that in, say, Texas, which is one of the states that's covered by the Fifth Circuit, they would risk arrest. They'd risk somebody, arresting them and charging them with breaking that federal law, because there's no injunction against enforcing the law yet. Now, of course, if that happened, it would be very difficult to actually prosecute the person, because once you bring the case to court, the court is going to be bound by this appeals court ruling that says the law is unconstitutional, and so you can't enforce it against this gun dealer. But dealers aren't willing to take that risk. We haven't found anyone in the Fifth Circuit who is actually selling. Dealers, licensed dealers, that's again who this applies to, selling pistols to 18 to 20-year-olds. And they're mostly, they operate off of what the ATF tells them, right? They're waiting for guidance from the ATF on this. And the ATF is probably waiting for that final injunction before they issue any guidance. But, it's an interesting piece. And, Ben goes through and he interviews local dealers down there, including Cargill, who was the named plaintiff in the bump stock ban case, for people who remember that. He was pretty frank about it in Ford, like nobody's going to sell these guns until the ATF comes out and says you can do it. And so everybody's waiting for that. It's too much risk and liability otherwise. And he also talked to the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which said, they're not really blaming the ATF yet for this. They're pointing to the fact that there's no injunction been issued by the lower court yet. And he talked to the gun rights groups that were involved, which had a similar take, although they also noted that even after an injunction comes down, there may still be some issues, primarily with the circuit split, which you've written about, Jake, in the past, right? There's this circuit split because the Fourth Circuit upheld this restriction previously, not that long ago. And so the Fifth Circuit is the only place where this law has been found unconstitutional to this point. And he also talked to a couple of Second Amendment experts that described, again, even after the injunction comes down, some of these dealers might not sell, especially if they operate across state lines, like they have a store in Texas and a store in Oklahoma. They might not change their policy on selling to 18-year-olds in Texas because they'd have to have two different policies then, because of the nature of this legal situation means that the federal law is still in effect in places like Oklahoma, or really everywhere but Texas and Mississippi and Louisiana, which make up the Fifth Circuit. So, it'll be interesting to see. And I think the big question here is what the Supreme Court does at the end of this, right?
Yeah, I think that's what everyone's going to be watching for in this particular legal question, because as you mentioned, the circuit split does exist. The gun rights groups that lost that Fourth Circuit challenge have appealed to the Supreme Court. And so they'll currently doing the briefing right now and seeing if this is a Second Amendment issue that maybe the court wants to take up. It would seem to be a pretty ripe one for them to choose, because there is a glaring hole in federal law in a big portion of the country. But you never know these days with the court and Second Amendment cases. So I think it is a bit of a wait and see on that front as well for this issue, in addition to all those other lingering issues that you've laid out there and that have been so thoroughly put together in this report.
Yeah, it was a good piece.
But outside of the Fifth Circuit, a different federal appeals circuit, we reported about sort of an interesting ruling from the Ninth Circuit related to California's concealed carry laws, and not in its current laws, but the ones that existed prior to the Supreme Court's Bruin decision. This came up in the context of a few gun owners in LA that were arrested pre-Bruin for carrying firearms concealed without the requisite permit at a time when obviously they're LA gun owners. So yeah, LA, especially at the time, was not known for exactly making it easy to get a concealed carry permit. They ended up suing over the fact that they were arrested under this, and said that, that we were arrested under a concealed carry regime that was later found to be unconstitutional. Therefore, you violated our constitutional rights by enforcing that against us. A district court said that they basically tossed their case because they never tried to apply for permits in the first place. But the Ninth Circuit just brought that case back to life by saying they didn't have to go try to apply for unconstitutional permitting process. So interesting outcome. Yeah,
certainly. Interesting from the Ninth Circuit, right? Which has this reputation for being very anti-gun, I guess would be a way of putting it. Like these gun rights challenges rarely make it all the way to the end and get into final injunctions in the Ninth Circuit, which, this isn't the end. It's just a panel, but yeah, this is notable in that regard that this happened in the Ninth Circuit, but also, that it goes back to these people who were charged under this old law that has since been found unconstitutional. Can you still continue to prosecute them when the law was unconstitutional to begin with? And the lower court, as you mentioned, said, well, you didn't even try to apply for the permit, so you don't have a case based on that, based on being, unconstitutionally denied. And the panel disagreed and said, no, it wouldn't have mattered because the permitting process was unconstitutional and everybody knew that it was more or less impossible to get a concealed carry permit in Los Angeles during that time period. So you can't hold these defendants, responsible for that. And it'll be interesting to see, where this ends up once it goes through the rest of the process on the merits. But notable, certainly, development there in LA. Go ahead.
I would say that's an important point that you bring up, that this isn't a final judgment against LA. This is simply at the motion to dismiss stage. So basically where the court is required to accept allegations as accurate by the plaintiffs. And then if they're accurate, what does that mean for the law? And so now that that's been allowed to proceed, the plaintiffs in this case will still have to prove that their allegations are accurate, everything's correct, and then try to achieve a judgment against LA on the merits, which, as we've talked about in the past, holding government officials accountable for constitutional violations, even when they're established, is still a very high bar for most private citizens. You have all these doctrines of immunity and the like. Mm-hmm. So there's still a lot to go in this case before you actually see a final outcome.
Yeah, basically the panel was saying, if it's true that it was more or less impossible to get a permit, then their claim is correct and is viable. But they'll have to prove that was the case. Now, there's a lot of evidence out there that it essentially was impossible to get them as a normal, average person, especially on the basis of a self-defense need, right? That was essentially completely thrown out as a potential good reason under these may issue permitting schemes that were in place in places like LA during that period. Speaking of LA and their concealed carry regime, we have a story from the Lynx, right? That gets at the current state of what's going on in the city.
That's right. Yeah. Cam Edwards over at Bearing Arms had a good piece doing an update on some of the individual gun owners, I think represented by California Rifle and Pistol Association, which is the big gun rights group out there, which is actively involved in litigation against LA about their concealed carry process, but an update on new stories of folks trying to apply to get permits. And even in the year 2025, you're getting stories of these folks saying, I can't get an initial appointment, the first appointment to even get the permit until a year out. So that's just to start the process. That's not even a year to process the whole permit. It's just getting the process started is taking more than a year in some cases. And Cam's piece documents numerous individuals that report similar experiences down there in LA.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like they've changed much in response to pressure from the lawsuit that the California Rifle and Pistol Association has going against them, or from this Department of Justice investigation that's looking into this exact issue. So it doesn't sound like the police department there has changed anything in response to either of those things yet. So we'll have to keep an eye on what that turns into, both legally and from the DOJ investigation standpoint.
Absolutely. And then another link we just wanted to briefly highlight comes to us from the Bollock Conspiracy, the legal blog from Stephen Hallbrook. And it sort of lays out the case. You know, we've been talking a lot about these ongoing lawsuits now that are being filed against the entirety of the bulk of the National Firearms Act in the wake of the One Big Beautiful Bill taking the tax away. And we talked to a lot of legal experts that were sort of dubious that that might fly, that those lawsuits might be successful. But Hallbrook lays out sort of the opposite legal case and details all of the past court decisions that have essentially used the tax itself as the hook to uphold the NFA in the past, and why he thinks that means that these lawsuits should succeed.
Yeah, and Hallbrook is essentially the founding scholar for Second Amendment study in the United States in the modern era, certainly. And, we had Matt the Rosier on the show. I'm sure I didn't pronounce his name right again there, but he needs to change his name to something easier, like Gutowski.
Floodbusters.
Yes, Gutowski is super simple, easy to know. But anyway, when he was on the show, he basically credited Hallbrook with, essentially creating the current modern understanding of the Second Amendment, or at least the study of the Second Amendment. And so his view is something worth considering here. It's pretty much in line, I think, from reading it, with what the gun rights groups are arguing in their case. So he seems to think it's a pretty viable avenue of pursuit against the NFA, at least for the items that have had the tax cut down to zero. So interesting and worth reading for sure.
Absolutely. And then the final link we want to touch on, a little bit of electoral politics and gun politics mixed up as we look ahead, obviously, to the election that's inevitably going to happen next year. And it's a rerun. Gun tuber Brandon Herrera, known as the AK guy. We covered this race last time, but he officially announced this week that he is going to once again try to primary sitting U.S. Rep Tony Gonzalez in Texas, sort of the San Antonio area. And if listeners recall, this was a primary challenge that was initially spurred on by support for gun control. And obviously, Herrera himself is known for his views on gun politics and his work with guns on YouTube.
Yeah, and he came really close to winning that primary last time. It was like close. 400 votes right at the end of it. Mm-hmm. So, second time around, maybe he's a bit more experienced in the sort of retail politics required to win a congressional primary. But, obviously Gonzalez still has the incumbent advantage out there. And it'll be interesting to see what the atmosphere is like for Republican primaries in 2026. But certainly I think, even outside of whatever the atmosphere ends up being, the basics of this race, the fundamentals of the race would say, yeah, he probably has a decent shot of winning again. He got pretty close on his very first attempt at political office first time around. And it is going to be a key race when it comes to gun politics, because the reason that Herrera is running is Gonzalez supported the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act in 2022, which instituted, some gun reforms, that included the first new categories of prohibited persons in like 30 years. when it came to the boyfriend, like domestic partners who don't live together but have been convicted of misdemeanor violence. That was added, and then also the expanded background checks for 18 to 20-year-olds that made the process longer for them in particular. That's what inspired his attempt to unseat Gonzalez. And as you mentioned, Herrera himself is primarily known for his gun content on YouTube and gun rights activism. So, how that goes the second time around will still be relevant to as a gauge, I think, for gun politics in the U.S.
Yeah. It certainly seems like all of our bellwethers for gun politics will be in Texas, because you also have Attorney General Ken Paxton primarying John Cornyn, in part because Cornyn was one of the chief Republican politicians involved in negotiating that Bipartisan Safer Communities Act as well. So we like to look for those races where they happen in election season, where gun politics becomes a salient issue. And it seems like we're at least going to have a couple to look out for next year.
Yep. So we will most certainly be doing that. Maybe we'll have Brandon on the show or try to, or Paxton or Cornyn as well. We'll see. Hopefully and we'll watch out for other key races too. Jared Golden would be another one up in Maine, the Democrat from Maine, who was one of the few moderate-ish Democrats who made it through the last cycle, despite coming out in support of an assault weapons ban. There's more out there. But speaking of gun tubers, by the way, we actually have another one of our segments where we bring on somebody who approaches their gun media the same way that we do here at the Reload, or take a similar approach to it. And this week we've got William Kirk from Washington Gun Law on. So I'm going to hand it off to myself to talk to him. Give you guys a little introduction to what he does. Okay, we're back with another segment here where we try to introduce you guys, our audience, to people who take a similar approach to gun-related content as we do at the Reload, but focus maybe on a little bit different area, or do it in some sort of interesting different way. And this week we've got with us William Kirk, the president of Washington Gun Law, which is not only a actual law firm but also a YouTube channel. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Absolutely. Appreciate you doing this. We're just trying to find some people who operate in a similar way that we do, and have them on and talk to them and get a little bit of background. So why don't we just start real quick with just a little bit of your background? How did you come to be a gun lawyer, and then I guess a gun content creator, or whatever you want to call it, out there in the YouTube space?
So born and raised out here in Washington State, went to college and law school here in Washington State. Family goes all the way back to 1883 in Washington State. So I'm about as Washington as you can get. After serving a few years as a King County prosecuting attorney, went into private defense practice, worked my way all the way from junior partner up to, managing partner, owning the law firm. Had another website that I had built out years ago that was just a depository of information for folks in Washington called Washington Gun Law. During the pandemic, there was a real need to get people educated about self-defense laws and other things that were happening, because our community was kind of going through a rather tumultuous time out here. So we started the channel in the middle of the pandemic with nothing better to do, but people needed to be educated. And just one thing led to another, and I kept doing videos, and you wake up one day and you go, wow, I got how many subscribers? That's cool. And so we just kind of kept with it and moved from Washington State, which is a mountain of material to work with, but we moved into the national areas, was able to create a good connection with the folks in Illinois when they were going through the Protect Illinois Communities Act. ATF obviously was the gift that kept on giving for a number of years with material there that really, pistol brace rule allowed me to really reach out and educate folks on a national level about what was going on there. And it just turned out to be a lot of fun, a lot of success. And It was an issue that I was always passionate about, but as a general criminal defense attorney in Seattle, Washington, you sometimes have to stay in the closet about some of your political beliefs to function out here. But this content creation has allowed me to kind of voice who I am and connect with other people who see the world the same way I do.
Yeah, and your channel has grown very popular to this point, so you're certainly resonating. And one of the things that brought it to my attention is the approach that you take. A lot of gun tuber stuff is mainly focused on entertainment, which is perfectly justifiable and good. You need entertainment, and guns can be a lot of fun, certainly in the right context, right? So that's wonderful. But you take a much more sober and serious approach, to borrow our own tagline for the Reload, and you're focused a lot more on the law, obviously, given your background. But I think you do it as well in a way that tries to capture some of the nuance, tries to acknowledge areas that we don't have full details or information on yet. And you try not to go too far out over, your skis, which is something that I respect a lot about.
Well, that's the trial lawyer in me, because as a trial lawyer, the whole world we live in is dictated by evidence and by proof. And so I don't do videos because I don't think people are tuning in to hear what I think. I think people are tuning in and not for me to tell them how to think. I think they're all big boys and big girls. They can think for themselves. My job is to give them these stuff to think about. And when it comes to the law can be horribly written with bigger words than necessarily needs to be used. And again, as a trial lawyer, you have to learn to communicate with people sitting in the jury box. And they're normal Americans who use normal English. And so you got to communicate to them in that fashion. And so what I've done with my videos really is I turn them into 9 to 10 minute closing arguments about this is what this issue is about, whether it's a case, a piece of legislation, a political move, whatever it may be. I understand that when the viewers are done with my videos, oftentimes they will be upset about the information that I've conveyed. But they will also be like, okay, I get it. I understand now. And then they can attach whatever value to that they see fit.
Yes. And I think that's the kind of approach that I levitate towards myself. And I think it's exemplified in one of your most recent videos, which, maybe we can transition to a little bit of the current events discussion here, because you covered the most recent update to the Sig Sauer M18 story, that was involved in this fatal incident at Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. And we just got news, the Reload wrote about this week, that the investigation has now taken a turn to where they've arrested an airman under suspicion of involuntary manslaughter, making false official statements and obstruction of justice, which kind of turns the narrative around about what happened in this situation. And I thought you made a really good video with some interesting insights that doesn't go too far in one direction or the other, right? Can you just give us a little bit of summary of what that was?
I was probably going to stay out of the P320 controversy because at the time that it was really flaring back up, it seemed to be a uniquely firearm-related issue, the actual technical aspects of the firearm, which, again, I don't think people tune into Washington gun law for me to go over that stuff. There's plenty of other more knowledgeable content creators in that field that people could rely on there. It was when SIG decided to kind of have a very bold, almost double middle finger reaction to it, that as a trial lawyer, I deal with, crisis management frequently. And I felt that they were doing a really terrible job of that. And that's when I decided to jump in. But the whole time, I've always wanted to stay down the middle. So when SIG softened their message, which they did, I was complimentary that they were moving in the right direction. The thing about the horrible, tragic incident involving this U.S. airman is that, there's always been controversy around this firearm. There was the drop test problems, and then there was this other rumor swirling around of these unintentional discharges. This terrible tragedy just completely flared this issue back up again. I mean, it was like throwing gasoline on the fire, and everybody started jumping in. And you really had two types of people jumping in. The SIG P320 is the worst thing ever made, and everyone needs to get rid of theirs right now. And then there was the SIG fanboys that were saying, there's nothing wrong with this gun, it's all user error. And so I found a lane in the middle there that no one was really addressing. The thing about the U.S. Air Force Airmen is that issue, which is the catalyst for this whole conversation completely exploding, has a radically different look than it did a few weeks ago, doesn't it? And the purpose of that video is even though we don't have the probable cause affidavit, if you take a look at what the law would have to prove in order for involuntary manslaughter, doesn't take a real vivid imagination to imagine some of the horseplay or shenanigans or really reckless behavior that may have gone on here that resulted in this death. And if that's the case, then I'm not sure the integrity of this particular firearm, certainly the firearm in question here, is really at issue at all. And again, people can attach whatever weight they want to that, but is that an important consideration as you're trying to decipher what's going on here? Because at the end of the day, many people have these firearms as their everyday carry, which means it's a relationship that's built in trust. Trust that this firearm is reliable enough to defend your life and those of your loved ones. And so when we have a violation of our trust, that can radically, if not forever, change that relationship. And this is important not only to all of the individuals, it's important to the SIG company. And if we take a step back on it, it's important to the Second Amendment as a whole, because we don't want SIG to fail. We don't want Remington to fail. We don't want Glock to fail. We don't want Smith & Wesson to fail. We don't want any of these companies to fail because they are all important in that exercise of those liberties. I would like to see SIG handle the situation better. I would certainly like to see everyone get to the bottom of this so that we can give a definitive answer to the end user and go, aha, here is the problem. But in the meantime, I do want everyone to, just tap the brakes a little bit. Let's see how this story develops. If you have one of these firearms and you don't trust it for the time being, that's a decision I respect. And that's your own decision based upon your equation. But I just hopefully one day we get to a definitive, aha, here it is, and we can all agree on that.
Yeah, and I think that final point is also important. And another reason why I thought your video was valuable, just because we don't know the details still of what happened. We know this arrest changes the perception, changes some of the implications of what you could read into what happened here. But just as when the Air Force first announced this incident had happened and they were pausing the use of the M18, which is, obviously for anybody, I mean, if you've gotten this far, you probably already understand that the M18 is the military version.
It's the military version of the 320.
But if you didn't know that, that's what it is. So when that first broke, the implication there was that, well, there must be something wrong with the gun because it was involved in this fatal incident and they're pausing use of it. But Air Force never actually said that, and they never gave us the full details of what had happened. Same situation here where we've got this update and it sounds now like the gun didn't malfunction, or at least that's an implication you could take away.
Sounds like a user may have malfunctioned. That's the issue there.
Because of the involuntary manslaughter.
And if in fact that Air Force command had pulled the firearm, if that is proven to be true, well, then the Air Force themselves overreacted reacted to false information just the same as the public did, because they were all operating under this premise that, this thing went off by itself. Now with these allegations, I'm not sure that that's going to be the case. Yeah,
but again, we don't know for sure yet, because the implication of somebody being arrested for involuntary manslaughter is one that they are at least accused, not convicted, just accused at this point.
That's right.
Of acting in a way that was so reckless that it got somebody killed. And they're legally responsible for that. Now this is this will be Air Force. It'll be military justice, so it's different from Washington law or other.
Right, but your involuntary and voluntary manslaughter statutes are relatively the same throughout the country. One is you operate in a negligent fashion, which is the proximate cause of a death. The other one is you operate in a reckless fashion, which is the proximate cause of death. The latter being a slightly more serious crime. The probable cause affidavit, I am itching to see the probable cause affidavit because I think it's going to be an amazing opportunity, again, to educate the viewers about not only what actually is alleged to have happened, but also how the law will then apply to those allegations. So I'm anxiously awaiting its release.
Yeah. And, taking that charge in addition with it, I guess they haven't said he's been charged yet, just that he was arrested under the suspicion of these offenses. But you combine it with that lying on an official statement and obstruction of justice gives you the implication that this person perhaps claimed that the gun went off on its own and knew that wasn't the case. At least, again, that would be the allegation. And again,
that
the
would be a
implication.
very educated guess, though. I will
This is a
assure you
guess.
that
This
would
is
be a very
speculation.
educated guess. Yes.
So that's why it feels like the narrative has flipped around. But again, we don't know for sure. And it's
That's right.
and it's important to make that clear to people and not just go off of assumptions of what.
Well,
what
and
may
I would caution some of the content creators out there also that to take a more measured approach as well. Your viewers are relying upon you for educational purposes, and I think you should be responsible in that obligation.
Right. And that brings us around, I think, to a nice tie on the bow here, because that is why I like the content that you create and why I wanted to highlight, your channel for our viewers, for anyone who wasn't already aware of it. I'm sure many already were, but, why I wanted to have you on the show, because I think that's what you step forward with. That's the approach you take.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
And I appreciate it. And that's why I would encourage people to go and check out your work and just to tie up here, where can they do that? What's the best way for people to follow?
Best way is on YouTube, Washington Gun Law. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram. On Twitter, we are at Gun Washington, because somebody already had at Washington Gun. Don't know who it is. So, and we'll put little short snippets from our videos. So if you need a little more smaller, digestible 60 to 90 second pieces, you can find those there as well.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate you joining the show. And that's all we've got for you guys this week.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you. Thanks for everything that you and everyone over at The Reload does. It's an amazing publication. And again, since I'm a big fan of educating and educating with objective evidence, you guys got to keep doing what you're doing over there as well.
We really appreciate you saying that and appreciate you coming on the show. We'll have to, again, have you back on at some point in the future.
Look forward to
perhaps do the full fat interview podcast at some point as well. But that's all we've got for you guys this week. We will see you again real soon.